is learning new, there we go, awesome, learning new technology. You can hear me well. And the first thing, I'm the new guy, and so I'm sort of trying to figure out how things work around here. And so I'm so glad to see that one of the automatic things that happens is the kids come up ready for the children's time. So that is great. I really, really appreciate that. Before we get started, I'm going to switch up the order a little bit, at least today, and I don't know, we'll see how this goes going forward. But I want to actually read the scripture before I talk to the kids a little bit. So we're going to read from Matthew's gospel this morning. And you know that Jesus had 12 disciples, or called them also 12 apostles, right? And this is the story of how he called one of them. Matthew chapter 9, starting with verse 9. Let's listen now for the word of the Lord. Okay? Now Jesus went on from there, and he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Now while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call righteous, but sinners. I got the chance to be here just a couple of times already. And once to interview with your search committee, but also last Wednesday, my first official day of starting as pastor here at Hope. I got to walk in the office and meet Lindsay Riddle and a few other folks who happened to drop by the office that day. But one of the great folks that I got to meet, of course, many of you all know Bryce Wyatt, who usually is back in the sound booth. And you know that Bryce is an impressive young man, and he puts together all these slides here for us on Sunday mornings, as well as handle some other technical stuff around the church. But he and I were talking about how worship would go and sort of the flow of worship and what particularly I wanted to include in the slides. And I said, I don't know, Bryce, just find something. This is my scripture. This is kind of what I'm talking about. See if you can find a picture for me. And so he called me back out to the sanctuary a little while later and showed me this. And I'm like, yes, that's it, isn't it? The new kid. I mean, I can look at that picture and imagine myself as this 5-year-old with the blue backpack on my back, walking that long road into the door of school for the first time. It's intimidating, isn't it? To be the new kid. No matter what point in your life you might do it, to be that new person. For me, I will admit, I grew up in the same little town just east of Asheville, North Carolina, in the mountains. Beautiful, beautiful place. But it was a place that I spent all of my growing up years, so that I really never had too many opportunities to be the new kid until I was in high school. And I won't get into all the details as to why this was true, but when I walked into high school for the first time, I definitely was the new kid. And if there's any point in our lives, perhaps certainly in mine, where that could be any more intimidating as a high school freshman, I don't know when it is. Particularly for me, I was a late bloomer, shall we say, and so I felt particularly intimidated walking in with all who seemed to me to be these very much already grown up young men and young women, and I was still a kid. And they had all known each other before and had moved up from middle schools together and knew each other and had their ways of being and doing things. And again, I was the new kid. And it wasn't always easy. I don't know what your freshman high school experience was like, but there was the kid the girl actually who made fun of my pants the first week I was there. There was also the upperclassman. Every time I would pass him on the hall, would pretend to punch me in the stomach, and every time I thought for sure this was the time he was actually going to make contact, and he'd walk off laughing. It is difficult to be the new kid. And so as I was thinking about this and about the new kid, that's why I particularly was drawn to this text in Matthew's gospel. Now, do you realize that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he really is sort of Matthew is the odd person out in terms of calling the disciples. Now, granted, I know that John tells the story differently. John almost always tells and remembers the story a little bit differently. But in terms of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the first three Gospels, the synoptic Gospels, we often call them, they have a similar pattern. And that is that familiar story at the beginning that most of us know of Jesus going by the lake shore and seeing all those men out in their boats fishing, and how he calls to them, right, and they drop their nets and follow him, leaving their dad to mind the fishing business all by himself. But then something happens. They move on from there, granted, and particularly the way Matthew tells the story. Jesus then takes his newfound friends and goes out preaching and teaching around the countryside. In fact, just before the passage that we read from Matthew's Gospel this morning, he tells that wonderful Sermon on the Mount, right? Going on and on for several chapters, laying out his whole vision for the coming kingdom of God that he would come to proclaim. He starts out, of course, rather momentously, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And then he goes on there to talk about the dynamics of the kingdom and the expectations of the kingdom. And they are high. They are high, he says. In fact, he says, if your eye causes you to sin, then you ought to just pluck it out. Or if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. For it's better to wind up in the kingdom missing an eye or missing a hand than to wind up in you-know-where. So people are impressed. He also then goes on to do some rather miraculous healings. And they wonder, who is this man who does such amazing things and who has set such a high bar? Who is this guy? And then he does the strangest thing, at least what seems strange to so many people around him. You see, he's walking in a border region, sort of in between two states, two places. And in this border region, there are a lot of toll collectors. Now, granted, I recognize in another few years, even in Florida with all of our toll roads, I'm going to have to explain what a toll collector is, since we can now zip through without paying any attention anymore. We've got that little magic chip in the front of our car. But you remember toll collectors, right? You pull up on some sort of paved tollway, and the person in the funky Florida shirt, with all the cool things on it, and they would ask for your, $1.50 or 75 cents or whatever it is, and you hand it to them or throw it in the little collector bin and be on your way. Well, think of that similarly in this neck of the woods that Jesus is in, this border region. Except imagine that the toll booth collector that you happen to pull up and talk to can actually charge you whatever they want to charge you. For you, it might be $1.50, but for you, sir, it's $10.50. Thank you very much. Because the toll collector can pocket whatever is left over. They can line their own pockets with your tolls, and as I said, charge you whatever they please. You can imagine then that these toll collectors are not very popular people. Always begrudging that they had to pay this fee. Imagine making it even worse that these toll collectors didn't work for the Florida state government or even our national government, but imagine that we have some sort of Russian or Chinese overlords, and they're the ones collecting the tax. You can imagine how despised these toll collectors, these tax collectors were. Not only collecting what they chose and lining their own pockets, but doing it not out of interest or for the people's own government, but by a foreign government, the Roman government, whose oppressive hand was clamped tightly around that land and those people. They were not well liked. They were hated. They were sinners of the worst degree. Jesus, though, happens to be stopped by one of these toll collectors, and his name is Matthew. And he looks at him directly and says, "Come, follow me." Well, that's surprising to many folks that he would do such a thing as that. I mean, after all, Jesus, isn't your bar set incredibly high? In fact, didn't you just tell somebody like yesterday, a guy who was so excited and ready to follow you that said, hey, Jesus, I'll be with you, but this afternoon I've got to bury my father and go to his funeral, but I'll catch up with you tomorrow morning, and you said, don't bother? And then you're going to go and call this guy? This tax collector? This worst of the sinners around? Matthew. To make matters worse, of course, Matthew was so excited about this newfound call and this newfound friend that he invites Jesus over to his house for dinner with all sorts of other tax collectors and sinners. And then the religious folks know that he really has gone off his rocker. Who is this guy that eats and drinks with sinners and tax collectors? Matthew definitely was the new kid. And apart from this scene, I can imagine the ones that unfold in the days and weeks after. In fact, I can even imagine in my own mind's eye that first interaction, not just that Matthew had with the Pharisees and with Jesus, but I imagine that first interaction he had with Peter, James, John, and Andrew. Again, he's the new kid. They, the disciples, the ones who've come together so far, have been together for a little while. They've seen Jesus heal. They've heard his preaching and teaching. They have developed their own sort of community. And then walks Matthew, the sinner, the tax collector. I imagine it going something like this. Hi. I'm Matthew. Yeah, Matthew, right? Yeah. I'm Peter, James, John, Andrew. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, nice to meet you. So how are you guys? Good. Yeah, me too, good. Yeah. So I hear you're a tax collector, a sinner. Yeah. About that awkward, I imagine. Now, I know how groups form. What a part of my extended study has been in group dynamics and how they flow and move and sometimes congeal together and sometimes break apart. One of the things I know about groups is that early on they can have a time where they sort of are nice to each other, you know? And I know actually that this period of being nice to each other is one of the most deadly things actually for a group. That eventually a group needs a little bit of friction, a little bit of push and pull. A way to go is, as Dr. Scott Peck would say, going from a false community where everybody's nice to each other and it's all sunshine and rainbows, to being a real community that recognizes that we are broken and that we need to be able to work together, to be constructive, to move forward. I don't know how that happened with Matthew and his newfound friends, but I trust that it did. But one of the ways that I trust that it happened, hopefully early on, is that Peter or James or John or one of those early disciples remembered something that they had learned back in Sunday school. I hope that they remembered a story that they were told as children. Maybe you know it too. It's the story about how Moses took the children of Israel and led them across the Red Sea with the Pharaoh's army in hot pursuit right behind them. You know how that went? And the sea opened up for Moses and let the children of Israel through and collapsed when it came time for Pharaoh's army to go. And you remember how they wandered around for a little while on the Sinai Peninsula there in the desert. And maybe remember that time that Moses went up on the mountain and received those 10 words, those 10 commandments from God. Honor your father and mother. Don't worship other gods. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't chase after somebody else's spouse. All those good things. But did you know that God says something to Moses just a few minutes later? He tells Moses to tell the people, look, one of the things I want you to remember, in addition to this great top 10 list, is I want you to remember to be nice, to be kind to others. Particularly, God says, be kind to the resident alien. Be kind to the stranger among you. Be kind to the person who doesn't belong. Why? God gives them a reason. Why? Because you know what it's like to be the new kid. You know what it's like to be the outsider, because that's what you were in Egypt. Don't ever forget that, and know what it's like for someone else to have that experience too. Now you can imagine that I bring all this up because today I definitely feel like the new kid. Now granted, this is a little bit different because there's a big banquet out there for me and my family in honor of us showing up, and that's a lot easier than what this kid had to face his first day at school. But there's anxieties, right? There's uncertainties about it all. Will you like me? Will I like you? Maybe you're thinking back as well. And how do things work around here? Again, I'm the new kid. You all have had a long history before I ever showed up on the scene. And what are some things maybe that you're wondering about me, or that I want you to know about me? Maybe it's simple things like I make a lot of lists, not because I like to, but because I have to. Or also because maybe I want you to know that actually down deep I'm an introvert. You may be surprising because I'll do a good job, I hope, of getting to know folks and welcoming and being available to folks, but just know that after I do that, I have to go take a nap. And I want you to do the same for my family, certainly, for my wife, Mary Lynn, my daughter, Lily, and my son, Graham, who didn't get to be here today because he's off in Atlanta at camp. So many things that I want you to know about me and to trust that it's going to be okay. And maybe there's some things that you want me to know about you. I suspect there's also some things you don't want me to know about you. But we're going to learn them nonetheless, aren't we, about each other. And perhaps like the way a lot of other groups form, there will be a wonderful honeymoon phase that'll last however long it lasts, and then that will be over. And that's okay too. In fact, there's something good about that honeymoon being over, because then we can get real, and we can get to work, and we can do stuff together. Pushing and pulling and dealing with who we are and what we are about and what God has called us to be and to do in the world. But I hope the one thing that we remember as we do this, that we remember those words that God spoke to Moses and to Israel. Be kind to the new kid, to the resident alien, to the immigrant among you, to the stranger, or in Matthew's case, or in all of our cases, the sinner, because you know what it's like. You know what it's like to be the new kid, to be the sinner, to be the one who's recognized as a sinner, or to be the one who you are afraid will be recognized as the sinner. But it's okay, because you are, because I am, and because he came, not to call righteous, but to call us sinners, to welcome us, and to call us God's very own. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Stand and sing together hymn number 372.